Hmm? Ah! Oh.
Yeah, I mean, the first answer, hilarious answer, was I am not going to continue my MeUndies subscription.
Podcast Junkies, episode 109. Welcome back, everyone. A little late this week. Had some travel last week. I went to a conference. It was really interesting. It was a conference on how to be a better speaker. But more on that later. If you're new to the show, my name's Harry Duran. I'm the host of Podcast Junkies. We release new episodes weekly with fantastic, engaging, fascinating, beautiful podcasters who tell their story, and it's not always about the podcast. If you missed last week, we had a conversation that was just all over the place and in a beautiful way with Mr. Matt Marr of the Dear Maddie show. And we did an interesting thing during that recording. The day we recorded, I recorded my interview with Matt, and the next hour, we recorded the conversation where I was on his show. So the link is in the show notes, Podcast Junkies /108 for my conversation with Matt. So this week I speak to Nico Johnson, and he's got a podcast about solar energy in Latin America. How random is that, right? And niche as well. So when you're always wondering about how niche you should go with your podcast, solar energy would have already been niche enough, but he goes one level deeper. And interestingly enough, the conversation digs into why he hasn't been as consistent with his show. And he's pretty honest and open about why it happens, and the fact that he was even able to get a sponsor, and some interesting conversations that had to happen with that sponsor as a result of some challenges he had with getting the episode out in time and consistently, which is something all of us struggle with as podcasters. So I think you'll enjoy that conversation. If you're new to the show, then we also have a retention hashtag at the end of the show where I find out who's been listening to the end. It's sort of my naughty and nice list. So stay tuned for that, and a little information about our newest sponsor, PodFunnel. You can find more information at podfunnel.com. And towards the end, I'll give you some more details about how you can join up as a PodFunnel pioneer. But for now, how about a little more Nico Johnson?
Hey, dude, it's good to see you.
You too, man.
Yeah.
I feel like we should have like a tiki bowl in front of us or something.
I was just thinking that. I was literally like, I don't know, singing random shit to myself downstairs. And I'm like, Chicago, because we met in Chicago for the first time. It's like the city of, tiki bars and $125 submarine bowls of fucking awesome hooch. I don't know what that stuff was.
Yeah, that was done in like 5 seconds.
Yeah, well, when you got 21 straws coming out of it, that was good times.
Very good. So we're going to talk about, we just started anyway. So whenever there's no beginning, there's no end.
Maybe we should talk about that. The second one, the second underground bar we went to. That was awesome.
The one with the hidden door?
Yeah, the hidden door.
Yeah, where
it's called the Green Door. If you leave this in, it's amazing in Chicago. You have to go to it.
Speakeasy.
You have to know the secret code, and you have to find the bathroom, but don't go to the bathroom.
So thanks for joining me on Podcast Junkies and talking about all things random.
My pleasure. I'm anything. I'm anything. I'm nothing if not random. So
that bar was a speakeasy, and we went down to look for you guys because I thought I lost my wallet at the previous bar, and then we couldn't find you. I was standing in front of that book. It's a bookshelf. It doesn't look like a door, and I'm like, well, they're not here. And then we went back up out to the street, like calling you, and then we're like, yeah, we're here. And you go back in, and she's like, oh yeah, they're in the other bar, and it's like this door thing opens up, which is always cool.
I love it. We followed the younger couple in who, when they walked in, so this bar is in the middle of nowhere, Chicago. It's like you have to walk 15 minutes from nowhere to get there. And we walk in, and it's like this Irish pub or something upstairs. And I saw immediately, it was like me and a few others, and JLD was like, dude, where are we going? And I saw this young couple walk in like they had a secret. Like they were looking around like people were following them. So I just kind of watched out of the corner of my eye and watched them immediately just walk straight to the back where the bathroom is. And it wasn't hard to find after that.
So for those who don't know who JLD is.
Oh, Jean-Louis Dumas.
Although most podcasters at this point know, right?
Yeah, I was actually trying to keep it anonymous, use our internal lingo, but yeah, I don't know if John likes. We could talk about a lot of stuff that would expose John's exciting lifestyle, and how everywhere he goes, his mission now is what's that app that us old people don't use as much as John does? Snapchat. Right. I've never once opened Snapchat. So, but his mission was to be mentioned in the city thing, like whatever.
Oh yeah. And he did, and it happened.
It did. It was awesome. Which it had nothing to do with all of the extravagance and awesomeness of the night we hung out with him, and everything to do with an amazing picture that he and Kate snapped, kissing in front of a flagpole. Yeah, he's such a romantic, that John Demas.
Shout out to John. We got to hang out at Podcast Movement, which is a lot of fun because I met him off and on a couple times. Just hey, hi, handshake, and then to get to hang out for a little bit and to get to know him that he's really as nice as everyone says he is.
He really is.
It's cool.
You know what? I think you should have your personal assistant just for shits when you don't have a whole lot of stuff for them to do.
Yeah.
Count up how many times you mentioned Podcast Movement in the last 100 and whatever episodes.
A lot, I'm sure. A lot happens there, and for me, I mean, it is the number one event for me as a podcaster. I mean, it's literally now that I go, it's where I meet up with all my old friends that I've met in previous podcast movements. I make new friends. I barely have time for any breakout sessions. And
yeah, go to podcastmovement.com/podcast junkies for your chance to enter a drawing now.
Which link 404 link like page not found.
Get on it easily.
So we connected at podcast, obviously at Podcast Movement. It's going to be the Podcast Movement drinking game now.
So sorry. You started wrong.
We met through Vernon. Well, I mean, we were hanging out anyway, and actually, Vernon had mentioned you.
Yeah. We didn't mention. So it's possible that Vernon had mentioned me because Vernon and I are good buddies, and we were roomies at Podcast Movement. But I actually came up to you and complimented you on something that you said in a talk about the way that you envision your audience. Happy to share that because it's exactly how I think about my podcast. But later in the hallway, I approached you again because I'm a little bit of an obsessive when it comes to wanting to get to know someone, and I've finally found them. And I really, really loved the first time I heard your episode was I was doing a little research on Jared Easley before I went to have lunch with him in South Florida when I was living in Miami. And I listened to your episode, and it perfectly captured Jared's personality.
Yeah,
I loved it. You guys rapped in the beginning, so I came up. That was one of my icebreakers.
Beatbox.
I walked up and mentioned how much I enjoyed the beatboxing in the beginning of his episode. And one of the things that you said at Podcast Movement that really stuck with me, and it's a comment that I was blessed with from one of my listeners after a handful of episodes, which is that your goal is that someone can feel like they're sitting on a bar stool beside you in a super casual conversation at a bar, like they're just eavesdropping on a conversation that perhaps they'd otherwise never get to hear, and that's exactly the frame of mind that I'm in when I'm recording my show as well.
At the end of the day, it should feel that's something that's not forced. And too many people are trying to podcast now, and God bless them because they need something to model or need something to copy, and so they look at what else has been done or what's been a top podcast, and so I'm just going to be that.
Totally.
Case in point, JLD. Someone's, I'm sure there's people trying to be like Serial, trying to be like Startup, trying to be like all these famous podcasts because they feel that that's what works. But at the end of the day, I wanted to do something that was entertaining for me and something that I felt I could do for the long run. And if I just had a formula or just had people on that I thought would get me better traffic, I imagine at some point I'd burn out and just get tired of doing it.
Yeah. Well, you're I've been a fan from the early episodes. Haven't listened to as many as I'd like, but I know I pinged you on text a couple of times recently because you've been my companion on a number of runs. Your show with Chase, number one, the first episode, and number 100 are fucking phenomenal. Like easily in the top 5 podcast episodes I've listened to all year. It's
Very nice.
amazing.
Thank you.
It really is amazing. And plug for back to the conversation about Vernon. Vernon's episode is killer.
Yeah.
Like just the personality. The personality in that episode is amazing, especially given that it's one of your early episodes.
Yeah, I think it was a conscious choice early on to connect at a human level with people. And I mean, I do that in real life, so why wouldn't I do that on my show, right?
Sure.
And then you get through the, hey, you know, what mic you're using. What, you know, at some point those questions just get repetitive, and you could probably find all that information on some other show. You know, podcast tips. There's tons of podcasts about podcast. First of all, and there's now a sub genre of podcasts about podcasters. Dan Lizette's Podcast Digest, shout out to Dan, is a really, really good show. What's interesting is that we just tackle different podcasters, and every once in a while we run into the same one, which just happened recently with Mignon Fogarty and with Hernan Lopez. We actually released within days the same guests at the same time, and this is not in communication with each other. We're not talking, we're not collaborating, but great minds think alike, I guess.
That's awesome.
But yeah, I mean, I appreciate you calling out the depth that I went into with Chase, because he's one of those guys that makes it really easy to have a free-form conversation. And I made it a conscious effort to, as soon as Skype was on, that the conversation was on. I didn't even tell him, like, we're recording. I didn't even tell him, welcome to the show.
There's that moment where he goes, should we start the recording now? Yeah. You know, it reminded me, recently I listened to Tim Ferriss's interview with Tony Robbins, which is an amazing interview.
The new one or the old one?
The latest one.
The latest one. I haven't heard. Okay.
Yeah. And he goes on these long diatribes where he is just dispelling wisdom, as Tony Robbins does. And it actually, like, I thought back, I'm like, gosh, this is like listening to Chase's episode, because Chase has these things he's super passionate about, and he would just go on and dig deep into it. And that episode felt like one of those. So yeah, I'm putting your episode with Chase Reeves at the level of like a Tim Ferriss episode with Tony Robbins. There you go.
If I could fit that to a tweet, I will.
There you go.
Why is it important to you as a listener, or why do you resonate with those types of conversations?
I want to know how people think. And all my life, like I read autobiographies, history of human development, and I think one of the things that Fizzle in particular, and Chase and Fizzle by extension of Chase and Corbett gets right, is that they help individuals think about break down like some of the stupid impediments that keep them from moving forward, but really think critically about what is important in their life and how they can augment that, and how business is only a portion of life. And so I love conversations with business people that get into their thoughts on just the human endeavor. And I think Chase does that very naturally. It flows out of his conversation in just about everything, and he's effing hilarious.
Yeah, that helps.
Yeah. And I've been thinking a lot about the topic of those types of conversations. I had a conversation just very recently with the guy who writes the check to sponsor my show about my concern that it's too long, because it tends to be 45 minutes to an hour. And he and I both listened to, these huge Dan Carlin and Tim Ferriss style episodes of, can be 1 to 4 hours long. And he challenged me to think about whether or not I'm pandering to, statistics and trying to grow the audience versus being true to myself. And so I think a podcaster has to walk that fine line of, am I podcasting for myself? Is this a hobby? If I wanted to grow and I want a bigger audience, how much of that sort of long form can I condense into a short form and still be authentic and still dig deep? So I tend towards listening to shows that go longer. And Tim Ferriss actually said it once early in one of his episodes. He said, I just find that it takes at least 20, 30 minutes of talking to somebody before they get through the surface level bullshit.
Yeah. Yeah, I just was speaking to someone about that recently as well. Jessica Rhodes. She books podcasters, and so she knows a lot about what works and what doesn't. And it's true, because it's part of why I only have people on that I've had some sort of connection with in the past. And even if it's not every single person, obviously when I get the opportunity to interview Brendan McDonald, Mark Maron's producer, I'm like, Twitter conversation is fine. Let's go.
Yeah, exactly.
So that was cool. And, Leah Tao from the excellent podcast Strangers. I just was after Podcast Movement last year. After her talk, I said, will you come on? And she's awesome. She lives here in LA. I ended up doing that in person, which is awesome.
Nice.
I had my Zoom. I recorded myself walking on the ground. And you could hear my footsteps. You could hear me. Okay, I'm nervous. I'm walking
that's
up.
A great idea.
Yeah, listen to, and then he hears me walking up. You hear me knocking on the door. She opens. She's like, hey, welcome. And then we go into the interview.
Which number is that? I want to go listen to that interview.
I'll look it up.
I do a lot of live interviews, in particular when I go to trade shows for my industry, because I have an industry podcast. That is such a fucking awesome idea. So what I did similar is I'm going to do this thing called Suncast is my show, and I'm going to do this thing called the Suncast Happy Hour, which totally came out of a fluke from a so I do this thing at the end where the person on the interview reads this thing that I've written, and it says, hey, welcome to Suncast, my name is blah blah blah. And she said, because it was like 5:00 and we were both drinking wine, she said, welcome to Suncast Happy Hour. I recorded it, and it is awesome. And I've literally got it in my back pocket. Like, I'm going to do at least, once a month or so, a Suncast Happy Hour. And that's going to be my intro, because she created it for me. So when I was last in our office in Sao Paulo, Brazil, I recorded the sound of a really busy, like really popular bar.
Yeah.
And then I recorded the sound of a really popular restaurant. And I'm just I'm cataloging, like capturing all these different external sounds, like you're saying, like walking, just so I can try to create a different texture to the show.
It adds a whole another element. Leah Tao was episode number 65. For those of you who want to check it out, podcastjunkies.com/65. I did something similar when I had the opportunity to head on over to CBS Radio, the studios here in LA, because Danny Pena, who was on a previous show, he said, hey, I'm going to be back in town, and do you want to come to the studios and record us? Last time, once was a solo episode with him. He's like, do you want to record the whole crew? So Danny Pena was episode 78, and I said, yeah, of course, man. So I'm driving to CBS Radio, and I had my Zoom with me, so I recorded myself in the car, and I said, hey, heading over to CBS Radio. This is a great, because of my podcast story, and literally, like, if it hadn't had a podcast, I wouldn't have the opportunity to go to CBS and record it. And it's every podcaster's dream. You show up, you just literally sit down at the deck, at the console. You've got this mic, all this stuff is being recorded. There's a guy behind the window recording, and I just started recording the crew, and it was amazing. And then you're like, all right, we're done. And then that's it. You just walk away, and they're like, okay, we'll send you the file. Don't worry about it. And so that was really cool.
Yeah, I listened to in particular, the Question of the Day podcast that Altitude just recently started.
Yeah.
And the Micro podcast. And I'm jealous because they both, in the show, like, they'll talk to their producer, and it's clear that they're sitting in a production room, like a real fucking studio.
Yeah.
And I actually had this question for you, because it's at some point, maybe we'll discuss it, maybe we won't, but one of the biggest reasons why my show is only 13 episodes right now is sort of production issues, or it really might be distilled down to Nico's inability to release his need for perfection. But how much editing do you do versus like having other people do production?
Not a lot. I mean, if you, the Chase episode is a great example. Unless there's something that is a technical issue where we lose the connection and we have to stop, or there's some crazy coughing fit or something, or the mailman shows up, and I'm like, okay, it's probably a bit too much. But I've had guests say, okay, let me look for that book, and while they're looking for the book, since I'm conscious that it's audio, I'm like, okay, I just start talking and they're just like shuffling. I'm like, okay, I found the book. And
Nice.
then just like, I let it stay in there because I feel like that gives you that sound, that feeling of being there, as opposed to if it's tightly edited, you're like, and we're back, and we're back, and we're back. And it's like this, almost like this scripted thing.
Yeah.
Whereas if you have the pauses, or sometimes if people take a while to answer a question, I debate on that sometimes because I always want to make my guests look good. So if they're fumbling with words and it's a long, well, they're going, and it takes them like a minute to answer, I'm like, well, it probably doesn't make them sound good, so I'm going to cut that. But for the most part, I think I leave it all in. And and then on one or two occasions, I've had a guest mention something that said, well, I don't think that would make sense for my boss to hear that because it was like something related to something that wasn't public yet. So she's like, can you cut that out? I was like, yeah, because people speak freely, right?
Exactly. You see, so mine's an industry related podcast, similar to yours, in that I'm interviewing people who are C-level executives, typically owners, founders, chief commercial officer, whatever, of their company. And because we're close friends, they often tell me shit that like they wouldn't just say. Like they would totally tell me this over a beer or over dinner. They wouldn't just say it out in the public. So I have to go through and edit a fair amount. And it's the unfortunate part is that it's so nuanced. And I'm not so one of the things, so it's so nuanced that I can't just hand it off to a virtual assistant, or at least I feel like I can't, to say, hey, go ahead and cut this down. What would be great is if I had the skills that, as we mentioned, JLD does. Like I know when he's listening to it, he actually flags stuff while he was recording, and his virtual assistant knows exactly how to do the edits based on his flags. I'm not at that level yet.
Well, so you could do something similar. So, for example, I'm using Call Recorder, and I'm conscious of the times. So I've had occasions where something really like a fire truck or something goes by. I make judicious use of the mute button as well. So if I know that if there's something making a lot of noise on my end, I'll just mute it. That way I make it easier for myself. So I do these little things that make it easier for me along the way. And if I see something that should have to be cut, like we lost a connection, I'm like, oh, minute 23 on Call Recorder. I see the timestamp. I just make a quick note, and then I keep going. And then that's like things you can do along the way, because there's probably something, if you were recording on your end, you'd see Call Recorder ticking off the time.
Oh yeah,
and Skype does as well.
Yeah, I use Pamela because I'm stuck in Microsoft world.
So you brought it up about this idea of only having 13 episodes, and it's interesting because if regular listeners to the show and people who've been listening for a long time, I think they know that when I started, I had this idea of wanting to speak to people who've been doing podcasting for a long time, and my internal marker was to say that you had to have at least 50 episodes because that meant you're taking it seriously. And I wanted to have people, as you might imagine, when you have a podcast that interviews podcasters and you go to a podcasting conference, people are like, I'll be on your show.
For sure.
And I'm like, I don't know who you are. So I don't know. I don't know. Yeah. Let's have a beer. Like, I don't know if you're interesting enough, no offense, but that we can engage for an hour, because that's important to me. And I want to be able to have a connection with you. And I think as I've gotten into the show more 2+ years, it's more important for me to have a connection with my guest and that they podcast. And I think the rest will work itself out, because I can get a feel for how interesting someone is, usually after a couple minutes or maybe after a couple of drinks together. And I know, like this whole vibe, like we're simpatico, and we can find interesting things to talk about that will be interesting to the listener.
Yeah.
And if you've got a story to tell about why you were so excited when you started, you've got this enthusiasm. I think you said, hey, it's Nico. Come here every Tuesday. I'm going to have an episode for you.
Yeah.
And so a lot of podcasters start that way, right? So what do you think happened between now and then the reality of weekly podcasting and then everything else you've got going in your life, like settling in?
Yeah, I'll back up even a little bit. I'll give a little more preface. So you invited me to be on this show, and this whole like imposter syndrome creeped in immediately. Like, who the hell am I to, Harry, that's great. You're being nice. Like, it was cool meeting you. I'm not your target audience. I could give a shit if I'm on Podcast Junkies because I'm not trying to promote my show, frankly. Like I'm just not. And I'll talk a whole lot about what's been going on in my mind. But when I think I mentioned to you, actually, I know for a fact I mentioned to you the day I went on and followed your link and said, okay, I'll book the show was the day I listened to Vernon's podcast with you. And that's one of the reasons why I think it's a great show, because that was where I realized early on that your focus was, okay, the podcasting is not always glamorous. And it's definitely not always profitable. It's actually most often not profitable.
Yeah.
I've had this burning desire to podcast for a long time. My wife, she was just so grateful that I'd finally done something with it. I was first going to start a kite surfing podcast, which Vernon and I may still do. And then I was going to, there are 4 or 5 podcasts, I'm going to start this podcast. I paid for Podcasters Paradise in February of the year that John put it out. One of the first few people that joined Podcasters Paradise, did 0 with it for well over a year. And I've been in corporate America for a while. I'm doing really well. I think that's the other piece is I have a 50, 60 hour a week job, have had, and, raising small children. And just had this glamorous idea in my mind. Oh, I'm going to start a podcast. It's going to be this side thing that I do that'll scratch my itch. I'm a performer, and I grew up singing. I grew up in music. I minored in music in college. Thought I was going to be a performer. Thought I was going to be in Nashville. Worked with a number of artists that ended up being in Nashville and being prominent, and have family members that are Grammy winners and stuff like that, right? I grew up behind the mic, literally grew up behind the mic.
Yeah.
So this is one of my most comfortable places. Holding a Shure SM58 is actually one of the most comfortable things I can think of on the planet, because since I was 3 or 4 years old, I was singing in church and whatever, So I just knew it was eventually going to happen. And as I mentioned before, I'm a little bit of a perfectionist and neurotic. And I couldn't wrap my mind around how to do it as a full-time employee, or how to be interesting enough that I could do something that would keep going. And then one day I was having a conversation with a buddy of mine, and I'm considered an expert in my industry, which is the solar industry, on the Latin American market. And one of my good friends was the analyst for the industry for a major media publication. And we talked all the time, and I was, one of his inside guys that would give him information on what's happening in the region. And he would tell me a lot about what my competitors were doing because he was talking to all of them.
Yeah.
So one day, I'll never forget this moment. I was chatting with him on the phone, and I just said, dude, we should fucking be recording this. This is so good. And he was like, we can't record this. I'm like, yeah, we can. And we just edited out the stuff that we can't tell everybody. And we did it. And he was my first episode. And then I wanted to launch. I hired Jeff, actually, from Read a Lead. I hired Jeff Brown, who's amazing. I hired him because John recommended him to me as a coach. And my wife said, if you're going to really do this, I want to see a business plan. I have an MBA, and my wife is top of her class in business school. She literally made me sit down and write out a business plan.
Really?
And I wrote out a business plan. I told her, this is how I think we can monetize it. This is why it's important to me. These are the ways that I think that this is going to contribute to our goal of having 7 revenue streams. And here are a number of them that I can monetize from doing the podcast. And made it clear to her, finally, that I didn't see the podcast as an end, but as a means to an end, which I think is the big failure that a lot of podcasters or would-be podcasters have, is they think, oh, I'm going to start a podcast. And you've heard a million times, everybody talks about this in the podcast world. It's passe now to talk about how it's not realistic to become a millionaire. You can't have a bunch of JLDs running around. But the reality is you can, if you understand what podcasting is good for. And that is, like Mark Maron, podcasting is a fucking excellent marketing channel. It's excellent. Yeah. You have a captive audience. One of my favorite examples of this is my friend JB Glossinger. And hardly anybody knows who JB is. He was one of John's early guests, and he has a podcast called The Morning Coach. he's been a top 25 iTunes podcast for like 7 or 8 years. He took it from 25,000 subscribers to 2,000 subscribers overnight when he decided that he was going to monetize it on his terms, and he started charging monthly fee. And it went from free to $20 a month. Now do the math. That's
for the podcast.
Yeah, do the math. He went from 25. He had about a 8% retention rate, which is amazing.
How did he track or know his subscribers? Because that's something. Or are you talking about email?
Yeah, no subscribers, and I don't know the exact answer to that. That's a good question about sort of the intricacy of iTunes, but he knows the number somehow, and he knows that it went from 25,000 to 2,000, and of course he knows he has 2,000 subscribers now because they pay him through a private portal. He actually has well over that, so do the math. 2,000, and now it's $30 a month, and I'm a paying member. Like that is an amazing example of intelligent life design, which is kind of his shtick, and building a business where you serve a community. And I could never really figure out like what's the community that I want to serve. And it dawned on me that day that I was talking to my buddy Adam, like, holy crap, I'm an expert on Latin American solar. It's the fastest growing solar market in the world. If you've ever listened to any episode of my podcast, like that's the exact words I use. And people don't know how to enter the market. Furthermore, like just doing business in Latin America is fucking hard, and it's a different culture. And oh, by the way, it's the fastest growing market in my industry, and people want to know how to go do business there. So I just said, okay, I kind of took stock. Who can I interview? And I had, I don't know, a list of 50 or 100 people that I personally know who have built businesses or significant income in the industry in that region. And away I went, like, I'm going to go record these. And I recorded like 10 episodes, and I was still had a full-time, really stressful job developing solar projects down in Latin America. And I released it on my birthday last year. So I'm coming up on the anniversary of launching the podcast, October 6th. And
when's your birthday?
October 6th.
It is October 6th. Mine's October 10th.
Right on. Yeah. Libra. So it explains a lot about my personality, in fact. But I am I'm still nervous and apprehensive of like, you're coming up on 100 episodes and me coming up on a year of having had the podcast. But I feel like I have felt over the last few months like a total failure, not in and of myself, but to my audience. Because I'll tell you the sequence of events. I think we talked about it a little bit at Podcast Movement. I launched on October 6th. I traveled, and so I had 4 episodes in the can. I recorded in the following weeks. I recorded another 4 episodes. I had 8 episodes. I traveled for 3 weeks for work on November 8th. And then I was on the Podcast Paradise cruise. Shout out to Jared Easley and Dan Franks and John and Kate, which was amazing, and it rocked my world. And I was gone for a week, and I couldn't upload an episode because I hadn't really planned ahead for it.
Is there no Wi-Fi on the ship?
Dude, I tried from the ship. It was so funny. It was just kept spinning. I'm like, oh my God, it's never going to upload. So that was my first week of failing my audience. And as I mentioned, I'm a bit of a perfectionist. So when I failed my audience by not hitting my weekly, a month in, like 5 weeks in, I felt like a bit of a failure. I'm on the Podcast Paradise cruise around all these people who are really, literally legitimate rock stars in the podcast industry, and can't get my shit together. And to make it even worse, I left the Podcast Paradise cruise, came home, took my family for a week in Guatemala on a business trip, because I roll like that. Because one of the ways I've organized my life is so that I can actually take my family wherever I go, because I travel for work. So we went to Guatemala, and I got called back from the business trip. I had to cancel my plans. I had to change my flights, all this shit. Long story short, I ended up getting fired. I ended up getting laid off. Not fired, because I wouldn't have gotten a severance. So I got laid off. I got a nice severance. And I had to answer a whole lot of questions about, like, what am I doing with my life? Not necessarily what am I doing with my life, but what does this imply about where my income comes from and what's important for me to do next? And if I look back on it, there was a lot of opportunity there where I could have made hay while the sun shines in terms of actually spending a lot of free time podcasting and growing that side of the business. But I freaked out a little bit, and
rightfully so.
Yeah. And you know the rest of the story as well. But for your listeners, I'll open up a little bit more. So a couple months later, I had a bunch of job offers, and a couple months later, found out that we're pregnant with our third child. And we were planning on moving, and I was planning on doing the podcast and starting my own company, which I started, and I was consulting, but quickly realized like another mouth to feed, insurance is going to be a bear. I need to find a main client. And one of my advisors actually said I had an offer on the table for half of what I had been making. And he said, look, this sounds to me like you just found your first client. They want it to look like a job. You want it to look like income. It's a no-brainer. And so we moved to Durham, North Carolina. Actually, not for the job, but coincidentally, we have an office here. So like, there's all this synergy in my life that was telling me, okay, just rest, relax. The universe is taking care of you. But in the chaos, I felt like I couldn't legitimately represent the voice that I wanted in the podcast, because I had represented to my audience that I was this international project developer working for a very well-known project development company, which gave me a bit of cachet, and it was something that I had rested a bit of my ego and my it was a bit of my platform, right? And I was really afraid. To this day, I still haven't said on the show that I'm not at Conergy anymore.
The cat's out of the bag now.
Yeah. I mean, everybody in the industry knows now, but I haven't said it on the show for some reason. But I was really afraid of what people might think of me.
When are you recording your next episode?
I don't know. I have recorded a bunch of episodes in the last 2 weeks. So my wife would say the answer to that should be someday soon.
So I think you should publicly commit to letting your listeners know about the news the next time you record your episode.
Yeah, sure, I'll do that. Yeah, so what I'm working on is cutting down on how long the show is, and I've cut down the intro, which is like, it was like slit your wrist long. I had a 9-minute intro for my first episode when I came back because I felt like I needed to explain all this stuff. And anyway, yeah, I will. So we're at 13 episodes, 4 of which, 5 of them have been what I've released since February. I released an episode in February, and then another one in June, and then I think 3 more in August. And one of the main reasons that I've been really conscious about releasing more episodes, despite the fact that life has been hectic. I moved, I got a new job. I'm now a partner in this company at a startup, and we're doing well. And I started a nonprofit, and I had a new baby, and we live in a new city, and I bought a house, and we're doing a lot of construction on it. So there's all these things. It's like, okay, legitimately, it's okay if I don't really prioritize the podcast, except in February, a sponsor cut me a check for $6,000 and said, I'd like to see where this goes. And it happened to be a close friend of mine. And he sat down with me about a month and a half ago, and he's like, dude, I get it, but this was a significant portion of my marketing budget that you convinced me I should spend with you. And it's now absolutely not going to hit my numbers this year. Like, it's not going to contribute to the reason I was spending money with you, which is to generate more leads and to see it come in like actually as new orders. And that was convicting, seriously convicting, because I had not been a good steward of this guy's trust or of his money. So I've spent a lot of time, a lot of heart, sort of soul searching with Vernon, because he produces the show for me now, about how do I make it sustainable. And I get a lot of feedback, man. I mean, I was just reading last night, I got this awesome in-mail in LinkedIn from a guy that basically said, hey, I was just having lunch with some mutual friends of ours in San Francisco. I've never met this guy before. And he recommended your show. I'm now through almost all the episodes, and I just want to encourage you. Don't give up. Yeah. And I was just like, wow, this is remarkable. Like, people recognizing that they've gotten value from the show and seeing that I haven't kept up with the weekly aspect that I sort of committed to, and just really genuinely encouraging. And he's not the only one. I mean, I'm in LinkedIn right now. I could look through, like, I've at least 6 of those types of emails since January of people I don't know, but whom I respect based on their profile and the connections that we share, who've said, dude, don't give up. This is worth it. You're doing a great job. And it goes back to the fact that, like, the original thesis was people want to understand what's on the mind and how of someone who's succeeded in an area of life or business that they want to succeed in, or that they look to as, like, I mean, there's this guy Marco Garcia. He's episode 2 of my show, really close friend of mine, and he's kind of he's an icon in our industry. He has been involved in more deals than just about anybody I know, and the guy's killed it. Like, he's been a part of 2 companies getting acquired by major companies, and on the show, he literally goes through, like, what he's thinking the night before arriving in a new country, right, Mexico or wherever, and, like, what he does to prepare for that trip. No, nobody in my industry talks about that shit, because energy is a stodgy old industry where it's the us and thems, right? It's the old guys who've done it for years, and it's the new guard that's going to have to come in and take over. And the old guys don't want to share with the new guys because the new guys are going to eat their lunch.
Yeah.
And so my thesis is, dude, like, we really need to break down this barrier. The old guys need to be sharing. And if they'll only share by talking to a friend, then great. I'll publish that.
So there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah. Sorry, I just talked for a while.
No, it's fine. How has that experience, and we'll dive specifically into some of the points in detail, but on the sponsorship, like, what did that teach you about this thought that you originally had, that it's my show, I can do what I want, and I can release it when I want, and, it's the Nico show. But now, maybe you didn't think about it when he gave you the money, but once you had it, and having had that conversation with him, how has that changed your thought process about those types of relationships and the importance of treating this as something that other people see as valuable and other people can get value from? And now you're in a partnership, so now that there is some sort of responsibility for you to be, like you said, stewards with their investment, and to take your show a little more seriously.
The answer to that question is, I want to wrap it in a way that's really meaningful to someone who's considering how they can monetize their show, and if that's important. I worked in major public companies as a senior leader in the marketing team. So when I approached this company, who I happen to know, which is the benefit of being where I'm at in the industry, I happen to know the guys with the purse strings in the marketing department. When I approached them, there was no question in my mind they were going to give me money. I never doubted it. It was really a question of how much and what was my value proposition to them. And it was really simple for me to break it down for them, because I was in their shoes spending marketing dollars, so I know exactly how they think. That said, it totally was a cold bath that I didn't really connect at a heart level, that my commitment to them was in their mind helping them achieve their number, right? Like, their actual, like, revenue depended on whether or not, when they send those little dollars out, they go out and recruit other dollars to come back with them. And that was complete oversight on my part. And it was a little bit of naivety, to be honest, despite the fact that, like what I just said, I was in their shoes. But when you're in the marketing team, like, it's a little bit of fake money. And he's not in the marketing team. He's the guy responsible for the region on the sales side. And I've been in both shoes as well. I've been in the sales team and responsible for hitting a number. So it took that for me to take my show seriously again. It took him calling me and saying, dude, I like you, man. And we're buddies, we're friends. But like, we got to figure this out, because I can't, like, I'm not going to be able to sponsor your show again if I don't show results. And furthermore, how's it going to look to your audience when you release 6 episodes that we've helped produce and your whole show is 13 episodes? It's like, get your shit together, dude. But put more episodes out, because I don't want to be 1/3 of your show. And it doesn't help. That actually doesn't help my brand, because it looks like now you're only doing the show because you're paid to do it. And that entirely was not the intent. The complete intent of the partnership with them was that they would underwrite creative content, and that they would help provide mutual exposure to new potential interviews that would be, slightly different and interesting. And what it did is it helped me actually produce the first shows in Spanish, which was one of my goals. But it just created this huge bundle of nerves for me as well, because I overcommitted. So the reason that I failed to produce their episodes, and one of the reasons why I failed to continue producing the show, are one and the same. I habitually put more on myself than I could handle. One way with my show is that I began producing it with a close friend of mine who's an excellent producer, but whose attention to detail and whose expectations for quality of show are par excellence. He is bar none one of the best producers I've ever met, and he has an exacting sort of perspective on what a podcast should sound like if it's meant to be produced. And I let that get in my head, and I let it affect how critical I was of every little element. Furthermore, he does a production element called in-story production, which is the NPR style, right? Where they break in and they're like, they break into the show and they sort of narrate the conversation. And I sold to this company that is sponsoring my show the notion of doing in-story and adding that to my show. And they bought hook, line, and sinker. They loved it. Like, why not? We'd love to be a part of helping you craft your show to become more NPR style. Dude, I realized after they sent me the check, like, holy crap. Actually, I talked to him and he's like, that's great. $1,000 an episode. Guess what? It's going to cost you about $1,000 an episode.
Yeah, exactly. That's no joke doing it at that level.
And he actually said, I'd be surprised if we'll get away with doing it for $1,000 an episode if you actually count the time you're going to put in. He said, this is 60 to 80 hours per episode in production value. And I almost fainted. I was like, holy shit, what am I going to do? So classic for me, I kicked the ball down the field and just, avoided the conversation for a while because, hey, I'm moving. Hey, I just started this new job. Hey, I'm having a baby. And then I realized, like, wait a minute, it actually doesn't need, like, I'm putting these chains on myself. So I called him up, and this is shortly after we had the conversation. Dude, I really got to hear some shows coming out. I said, hey, I'm going to change the format of what we've agreed to, and I want to see if you're cool with it. I'm just going to keep doing my show the way I do my show, and I'm going to interview the guests that you've proposed in the same style with some specific questions meant to get to the heart of why you're sponsoring. Is that cool? And he goes, yeah, that makes perfect sense. Why didn't you say that the first time? Like, we should have just done that.
Yeah.
He goes, is that why you haven't produced a show? Like, yeah, that's why. Because I was afraid I was going to fucking fail. And he said, he goes, man, I get it. I totally get it. Now let's get some shows done. And so we have the last one recording on, it was supposed to record yesterday, but it's recording on Monday. And I'm going to be working all weekend on producing those shows. And I've got 4 episodes already in the can that I need to start releasing. So we're about to get back rocking with it. But yeah, it's something that I've had high hopes for the show, but it's been a lot of soul searching on what do I want to do outside of my career in the solar industry. Like, how do I really leverage the fact that I've been in the industry for 10 years? I don't want something to negatively reflect on the integrity I've created in the industry and the character that I've created. And this was all created as a personal branding aspect. Like, my show is a way for me to decouple who I am as an industry professional from the companies that I work for.
Yeah.
And it worked flawlessly. And it scared the shit out of me because I started thinking like the classic, what if this actually succeeds? I don't know if I want a podcast every day. Like, okay, what else am I going to do? I got to make courses. And I started running through all the stuff like that was on my business plan. Oh God, now I got to go create all that shit. Yeah, so it's taken some time to really, I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I'm just talking through this shit with you, man. Because it's actually like, this is therapy for me. So thank you, right?
Well, it's podcasters. There's a podcast called Podcasters Therapy. Yeah, but I think what's important is to realize that because you were in their marketing shoes, to some extent, you took advantage of that information. And you said, like you said it yourself. Like, I knew what their answer was going to be going forward. And
I totally manipulated it completely.
And it ended up, backfiring and, coming back to haunt you and, almost derailed the entire podcast. But I think it sounds like you were able to recover. It sounds like you're back on track. Looking at the schedule, you released a couple in late August, and I'm assuming you're back on some sort of regular schedule now.
Yeah, I am. And that, well, it's been a month.
Yeah.
My intention is that I'm on the fence right now. So my answer maybe is no, I'm not on a regular schedule. Let's be honest with ourselves. But my anniversary of the show is coming around, and I've actually been lining up a lot of amazing interviews. Just yesterday, for example, so I was at a trade show last week, and like the major trade show, and I recorded a bunch of shit. And then I met with a guy who doesn't fit the profile of my show at all, but he's a CEO that has done amazing things in our industry, and he's 35. And his company just yesterday was named number 3 on the Inc. 500 list. And he and I were texting back and forth, and he was like, "Great, when do you want to record?" Because he wants to share his story, because I told him that he should. And I was telling him all this stuff about the way he grew his career, and he was thinking about it because we were competitors, and so I knew a lot about him, and we became friends. And I said, "Dude, you really should tell your story. It's inspiring." And he'd never thought about it. And I said, "Well, would you let me, would you give me the opportunity to help you tell your story?" And so now I'm thinking about what does the content of my show really intend to do, and what would seasons look like, or thematic approaches to addressing my audience's deep curiosities. And one of those is I want to do this theme around, and I actually got I got confirmation from several industry icons that are founders of companies that they would come on the show. So I'm going to do this founding fathers theme. I don't know, 5, 10. It really comes down to how many people say yes.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to do the young guns. So who are the guys that are following these guys' footsteps, and like the next industry leaders? I'm going to do, and so I'm doing sort of segmenting it now. I'm going to do a series on energy storage, a series on energy auctions and how to win energy auctions, because that's a big part of our industry. A series on deep dive into relevant markets, like let's look at the top 5 markets and what is relevant to know about them, instead of just kind of willy-nilly. One of the reasons that I just don't have a plan, like I haven't had a plan. I've just said, okay, well, I'll see if this guy will go on the show and I'll interview him. And instead of saying, here are the people that I want to interview and here's why, and I'm going to organize the structure of it in a way that makes sense to the listener, and that they can go back, that'll encourage them to go back and listen to chunks of content, right? So what I want is something that is evergreen, in the sense that if a new listener comes in and somebody has said you should listen to Suncast, and they want to know everything about storage as it pertains to the market, they can go to these 6 episodes, and there it is. And I don't need to keep asking every fucking interviewee like what their thoughts are on storage. You know?
Yeah, I think what was interesting when I first heard what you were doing with your show was the fact that it was super niche to me. I mean, you're like, solar power in Latin America. I'm like, okay, it's not just solar power, but it's solar power in Latin America, and I'm like, wow, man, you must have like a ton of listeners who really get value from the show. And
I can share the numbers.
Yeah, if you like, sure.
Yeah, I get between 500 and 700 downloads an episode, and that's with practically no marketing. That's just through my network.
And for listeners who are not as familiar with what that means, Libsyn, a popular hosting company, has a podcast where they share what the median numbers are. And I think if you're 170, 175, you're above half of all podcasts out there. And then you start to get into like thousands and 2000s. But yeah, I mean, I think for that, those are solid numbers for any podcaster, especially one who's being a slacker with his episode releases.
Totally. Actually, and knowing my numbers was helpful for me because it didn't matter. Luis didn't care how many.
Yeah, and that's another important point too for folks looking to get sponsorships. It's not about download numbers. The guy's cutting you $6,000 check. Now you just have to record those damn episodes.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I was
accountable. We need a podcast production accountability group.
We would start or a podcast.
I just need a mastermind. That's actually been another area of like, fucking, why don't I have?
So you mentioned earlier you're a fan of autobiographies. Have there been any particular ones that have stood out for you in terms of like, oh, like this resonated with me and it's something that I carry with me in my life?
Yeah. In particular, I'll just name one because I was just thinking about it today. Andrew Carnegie. And I pronounce it the correct way, Carnegie. So Andrew Carnegie is the quintessential entrepreneur. And yeah, it can be argued that he built his wealth on the back of breaking backs. But it can also be argued that having come to the realization that he had become the richest man in the world because of his arbitrage and questionable business practices in the early days, he realized the importance of giving. And so I can't remember the name of the book right now. It's on creating wealth. It's the something of wealth that he wrote that effectively says we are, and by the way, he was a big advocate for the estate tax because he believed that it was treason. It was absurd that all of these families pass their wealth down from person to person instead of redistributing it to the community. And so he was a huge, huge advocate for the cycle of wealth and the recycling of income back into the community. And that's why he built over 2,800 libraries, Carnegie libraries. That's why he built Carnegie Hall, to expose people to culture. The Carnegie Foundation, a lot of the ways that he spent the entire second half of his life giving his money away. And he was an advocate for thinking in a way that puts you in the center of the redistribution of wealth as opposed to the aggregation of it. And so, yeah, there's a book.
Is it The Gospel of Wealth?
Yeah, that's it.
As Nico heads on over to his bookshelf.
Yeah, I usually have it. So I've moved, and all of my books are. It's funny that we talked about this already, but all of my books are just spread around because I haven't finished unpacking. But it's the tome in particular that there's been a bunch written on Andrew Carnegie, but the one that I love is it's black cover. I don't remember if it was an autobiography or what, but it is thick. I mean, it must be like 800 pages, and it. He's just a real inspiration. The other one that's a really, really cool autobiography and everybody should read is Ben Franklin's autobiography.
Yeah, heard good things about that as well.
Yeah.
Well, we're at the hour mark, interestingly enough, for someone who didn't think we'd have a lot to talk about on the podcast. But I think what was what fascinates me is the journey that you've been on, and that a lot of listeners can relate to, because you've all been there as well in terms of thinking about how you start your show, how you're going to continue with it, what's going to keep you motivated to record week in and week out. What value are you providing to your audience? What type of engagement are you receiving? And are you taking that feedback to heart and using it to make your show better? And I think through a series of ups and downs that you've had over the past year, I think you've learned a lot of lessons, and I think importantly enough decided not to quit and maybe even double down and figure out how you do make this work.
Without a doubt. Not the least of which is because we had a third kid. I'm making half the money I made last year, and my best friend and accountability partner constantly reminds me, dude, you could be making money from your podcast if you would just produce one.
Yeah, so, it's interesting because you're in an industry where you can easily rise to the top as a thought leader.
No
If you look at even if you search for podcasts, I don't know how many podcasts are cover solar in Latin America.
Zero.
One.
Zero. One. Yeah, one. So one sort of does.
Sometimes it seems like zero because you don't publish an episode, but
that's right. Yeah, but even solar industry, there at the time of publishing a year ago, there were 5, and energy broadly, there were less than 50, less than 25 that had any regularity, less than 10 that had a weekly show. And the Energy Gang, which is probably the top and longest running one thus far, it has become the guy who produces it, Steven, has become a good friend of mine and wants to collaborate. And that was another thing that scared the shit out of me. So yeah, you got to be careful. Like if you, like me, are very well connected in an industry, the fear of success is greater than the fear of failure, because then you have to answer the question, do I really want to do this on a consistent basis? And then my parting thought for your listeners is what gets scheduled gets done. Yeah. Pure and simple. If you don't have recordings booked on your calendar, you're not producing a show.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I now have probably 4 or 5 episodes in the can, and I'm always conscious of having conversations or following through on emails where I've indicated to people that I want them on, but you have to work at it, because at some point I used to be in the past where I was like, next week I don't know what I'm going to do, and I'd have to try to rustle up an episode. And I think it's important for me to be at least 4 or 5 episodes in from a recording perspective.
I think that's also the flaw of folks who follow the JLD model, is they think that everyone who's a successful podcaster has 8 or so shows in the can, or 3 months. As John's just a machine. Yeah. But the reality is, like, people who've been podcasting a long time, and by now you've been podcasting a long time. Jeff Brown, Read to Lead, podcasting a long time. Jeff has a show format that sometimes leaves him high and dry. Like he can have authors call and be like, yeah, I can't record right now. Mm-hmm. And he's told me, he said, I've had guys, I've been on Monday without a show because what I had counted on, I didn't have anything that can. So it's really important that you have a plan. And if you don't have a plan, you'll fail. And that's the primary reason why I failed. Despite having a bunch of things written down, I didn't have anything scheduled after episode 9. And my life got crazy. And since my life got crazy and I didn't have things scheduled, I let it go. So yeah, what gets scheduled gets done. What gets measured gets managed.
Yeah. Very good words to live by. So just wrapping things up, a couple of one-off questions. What have you changed your mind about recently?
I feel like I change my mind all the time, Harry. I want to give you an actual answer about something that matters.
And it doesn't have to be podcasting related.
Yeah. The first answer, hilarious answer, was I am not going to continue my MeUndies subscription.
That's an important one.
Yeah,
I'm assuming you have a backup plan there. Otherwise, you're just
dude. I've had a subscription for a year. Who needs more than 12 underwear? Come on, they're amazing. I love MeUndies, but my wife was like, "Really, another MeUndies package?" She's like, "Why do you all of a sudden have more?" Well, not all of a sudden. I've always had more shoes than her, but. Why do you have more shoes and more underwear than me? This is very
troubling. That's hilarious.
Yeah, I'll give you. My other one is I decided to cancel ClickFunnels, but that's for another show.
Yeah. It speaks to this overall thing of this new economy of like subscriptions, and I was prone to that. I was prone to that as well. I had joined Tim Ferriss's Quarterly Club, and I look forward because Tim Ferriss is a fantastic curator, and then at some point. My wife as well, she's like, another box of like crap showed up, and she's like, "What?" It was like a wrestling DVD. It was like a Japanese flexible saw, and I was trying to rationalize like where I would possibly use any of that. A couple of things were really good that I still use, some exercise balls and stuff. But then it was like there's a back massager with like knobs and stuff, and you would just like.
I'm holding this up for you right now. This is proof positive. The guy on the front of this episode, or of this week's Inc. Magazine 500, nobody knows who the fuck he is. But you know what he did? He created the fastest growing subscription company in the world.
Is that Birchbox?
Loot Crate.
Okay.
Who's Loot Crate?
I don't know.
Who the hell? No, dude, they grew 67,000% year over year. 67. That's gotta be. I mean, I haven't looked at statistics, and I'll use them to my advantage. That's gotta be the fastest growing subscription model in the world.
Yeah.
Holy crap!
But then people, what it speaks to is just all this crap that people have in their house now, like
Chris Davis. Thank you for filling our house with shit, Chris Davis.
Like 37 pairs of underwear.
No, I'm a trunk club. The thing I love about trunk club
club
is
cool too.
Is that you can send the shit back.
Yeah, that's good.
But oh man, they've got a lot of my money. My wife would be like, another trunk? I'm like, hey, sweetie, I can send it back. I don't have to buy anything.
What is the one most misunderstood thing about you?
Oh, God, this is a good question, man. Thank you. My buddy Charles Gupton. Thank him. I love that guy. You met Charles, right? Charles Gupton, Creator's Journey.
Okay.
Tall guy, really like glasses, wore a hat. Anyway, Charles is amazing. He's a fellow podcaster here in the Raleigh-Durham area. Shout out to Creator's Journey. It's an amazing podcast. And Charles Gupton is just an amazing human being. And we had breakfast before he went to Camp Good Life Project, which I couldn't go to because I had a baby 2 weeks before. Which is also amazing. Jonathan Fields is just an amazing curator of human beings. So he said something to me that rocked me. I was sharing with him, like in tears, about how frustrated I was and how much I was struggling with a lot of things that I won't go into detail about that were real personal struggles. And he said, wow. And he was in tears. And he was like, dude, he's like, he goes, here I have in my mind and perhaps on this pedestal, like Nico with his cape flapping in the wind behind him. And I said, what? And he was like, yeah, dude, like I just had this image that you're Superman, like nothing affects you and you just are constantly in charge. It could not be further from the truth. I am, oh God, dude, that's a whole other podcast episode. I mean, literally, I could tell you so much about the what happens or not inside of my head that contributes. And I mean, by any standard, I am successful. I will not deny that. But I'm proof positive that it doesn't matter. Like you have defining success by the world standards is not success. And if you don't get a handle on yourself, if you don't get a handle on who you really are and what that means for how you maneuver this world, then you're lost and you're not successful no matter if you're a billionaire. And there are lots of great examples of why that's true. But the biggest misunderstanding about me is that people think when they meet me or when they've even known me, in Charles' case for over a year, that somehow I'm superhuman. And I wake up every day feeling like I'm a fucking retard. You know, like, why can't I finish producing this podcast? Why have I made this to-do list on Monday morning that I haven't checked one thing off of, but I've had a productive week? And why didn't I go back and look at that to-do list that I created? Anyway, I accomplished a lot of stuff, but I don't consider myself by my own sort of perfection standards successful. And so, yeah, that's one thing misunderstood about me.
Yeah, and I imagine we can tease that out 12 Ways to Sunday, but that's probably a good place to put a bow on this podcast therapy session. For any podcaster, I think they're going to get a lot out of it because I imagine they relate to a lot of what you spoke to. It's not easy. It's not a walk in the park, whether you're at episode 13 or episode 103. I think, interestingly enough, they're both 1 and 3 in the number. But yeah, I think everyone's on their own journey. And to the extent that you think it's important for you and you think it's important for your listeners to continue, then I think you owe it to yourself and to them to do that, or like they say, shit or get off the pot, right? Or just stop it, because you're wasting everyone else's time. Because if you're gonna give people the impression that this is something that's important for you, but then every time you finish an episode, you're like, oof, I just barely made it over the finish line, and it's just like a pain, and I dread recording episodes. Like, don't do it. You know, it's not helping you. It's not helping your audience. But if you do it, then realize where there's places that you can improve. And then just double down and then just make the best show that you think you can.
And I think a good litmus test, I completely agree with you. A good litmus test for me was very recently, I recorded an episode and I walked down to my wife and she said, you look like you're floating on clouds. And I said, yeah, I should record an episode every day. And she said, yeah, why don't you? And I said, because that means I'd have so much fucking content to edit. And then I would slit my wrists and you would be here alone, cashing in on our, oh wait, maybe that's why you want me to produce so much content. Yeah. So, the thing is, if you record and it fills you with unmeasurable amounts of adrenaline and dopamine, you're probably onto something.
Yeah.
You got to figure out the rest, though, or you'll never put it out in the world.
Amen, brother. So where's the best place for folks to track you down?
Honestly, like LinkedIn is probably where I am the most prolific. I tell people on my show to tweet at me, and I see it like 4 weeks later. So at Nico, MEO, Nico Mayo in Spanish, is my Twitter. But really, just like if you search Nico Johnson on LinkedIn, I'm almost guaranteed to be the top result. And mysuncast.com is the show. And Suncast, if you search that in any podcast player, it comes up usually 1 or 2. And I don't know why they would want to find me, but I'm happy to have conversations with people if they're curious about, if they need podcast therapy.
Yeah, if they just want to commiserate, they can call you. Right?
Exactly. Yeah. I love making new friends, and I'm really grateful for our friendship. It'll go in my 5-minute journal this evening. Thank
you so much. I'm glad we've met, and I'm glad we had a chance to dig deeper, and appreciate you taking the time to come on and to be so open with your journey, because I think it's going to provide a lot of value for listeners. Thanks, brother. When I'm out in LA, I'll look you up. Sounds good. So thanks to Nico for being so open and honest about his challenges with the podcast and for sharing that story with us. I think there's several of you that are listening that can relate to what it's like to get so excited about something and then realize after you understand what's involved in getting this out week in and week out, that it may not be all that it was cracked up to be, but I applaud him for sticking through with it and for telling some of the stories that put a smile on my face and reminded me of the fun that we had at Podcast Movement. Podcast Junkies is a proud member of Podcastica. Head on over to podcastica.com and see all the shows that we've got there in case you haven't done so already. If you are new to the show, then you may not know all the fantastic shows we have. We are happy to be connected to. But what I wanted to talk about really quickly was the Patreon page that's been set up for Jason and Karen to support the Walking Dead cast. It's something new that they're doing, and it's something that I wholeheartedly get behind. So head on over to patreon.com/Jason and Karen, the word "and" spelled out. And it's something that they want to do because they want to focus more of their time on getting support for an incredibly popular show, something that I love a lot. So I just wanted to devote a little bit of special time to them, so you can check that out. Music is provided by Cedar and Soil. Check out Cedar and Soil. Check out cedarsoil.com for the new music that George is putting out. He's a really great friend, and I'm so happy that he's been with me since day one of this podcast. You can subscribe to the podcast at podcastjunkies.com. This episode is brought to you by PodFunnel. If you are a solo podcaster and you understand the importance of getting your show out to a bunch of different destinations, like getting it to your Libsyn account, getting it to WordPress, getting it to SoundCloud, getting it to YouTube, and you realize that there's not enough time in the day to get it all done, and you're wondering, when am I going to get back to the dinner table to have dinner with my kids? Am I going to be able to tuck in my daughter? Am I going to be able to take my wife or my husband out on that date night that you have scheduled every week? Well, if you're sitting at the laptop trying to get the podcast distributed to all these different sites, then it's going to drive you crazy. It drove me crazy, and that's one of the reasons why, with some help from some tech friends that I have, I put together this tool that I think is a godsend for podcasters, especially as we start to add additional features. We're going to add connections to Facebook, to Instagram, to Google, and some other destination sites. Well, maybe not Google. Google's going to be on the back end of that because we haven't seen much traffic there. So maybe scratch that, but definitely Facebook, definitely Instagram. And we're going to make it as easy as possible because you're going to just use the PodFunnel front end. So podfunnel.com, we're signing up beta listeners, and people who get in and sign up now are going to be able to have the tool for life. Life is a long time. So if you made it this far, then you're listening for the retention hashtag. Then that's going to be SolarNico, SOLARNICO. Feel free to tag him at Nico Mio, NICOMEO, and podcast_junkies. Let us know you made it this far. Stay tuned next week for my conversation with Christine Blackburn, host of Storyworthy, which is now on the Wondery network. We found out we were neighbors, and we're still doing it over Skype. So that's funny stories, podcasting related. Always a good time. Hope you check that out. That's going to be episode 110. Have a fantastic week, guys. Thank you.